can all join palms and repeat after me. I take refuge in the Buddha.
I take refuge in the Buddha.
I take refuge in the Dharma.
I take refuge in the Dharma.
I take refuge in the Sangha.
I take refuge in the Sangha.
Keeping the palms joined. Put the palms down. All right, good evening, everybody. Thanks for showing up on this Tuesday evening. Glad you're all here. I wanted to just kind of bring up as a gentle reminder for everybody. To me, one of the most important Buddhist teachings, you can all come up, that way I don't have to scream and yell. You always go straight to the back. Feel free. Is just the reminder of the teaching of impermanence. And it's something that, we look at the Buddhist teachings, the first thing this dude said was life is filled with suffering. And that's the first thing. So we already know that we're going to suffer a lot. Doesn't mean all life sucks. Just means you're going to struggle. You're going to have challenges. You're going to have difficulty. If you showed up here at a Tuesday night or any night at 7 o'clock, you've probably figured that out by now. Right? That we're going to have challenges in our lives. That's not the problem. The problem is our relationship to these challenges. In addition to I think all too often, practice of recognizing a difficulty or a challenge that we're facing and thinking that it's just never going to go away, or that it's always going to be there, or that it will get worse. Not the reason I brought this all up, but you ever had a problem that actually got better? That does happen at times. I just want to remind you all of that. But for some reason, when we're stuck in the problem, whatever that problem might be, we lose sight very often, or we forget very often of the teaching of impermanence. And what that means is that problem, that issue, that difficulty, that challenge, it absolutely will change. And sometimes just the knowledge of knowing that that conflict you're facing will change can actually just help your mindset and approach to the actual problem that is occurring. It doesn't necessarily change the problem. If something sucks and it's painful and you know it's going to change, it doesn't mean that all of a sudden you're like, all right, well, this is cool now. It'll change. No, it still sucks when you're going through it. It's still painful when you're going through it. But too often we go through things and we think that they're just never going to go away or never going to change. And when we get locked in that mind, then everything else that occurs is just that much worse, because we're stuck in that real negative place. So the night is young. As conflicts arise and difficulties arise, the rest of the evening, which they will, as they occur, just remind yourself that this will change. And it might get better. Might get worse. I mean, I don't want to, set you up for any false expectations. It could get worse. But there is the slight possibility that it could also get better. So hold on to that idea and that practice as difficulty arises. Because typically we get through whatever we're going through, and then something else occurs. And sometimes it's beautiful and pleasant and fun, and sometimes it's painful and sad and miserable. And our entire life is just a series of these experiences. But the way we view them and approach them really makes a big difference. So with that, we'll start with a meditation practice. And to those who are joining virtually, welcome. Glad you're here. Thanks for showing up. Feel free as you are to say hello. There's a chat box somewhere on your screen. A couple things I'll tell you before we begin. For those who are maybe sitting for the first time, nothing's going to happen to you. Right? You're not going to float away. You're not going to have any mystical, magical experiences. The mind that races all day long is not going to shut off. Don't judge your practice, meaning don't ask yourself, is it working or not working? Are you doing it right or wrong? We're just going to sit, we're going to breathe. Okay, you'll hear sounds inside, sounds outside. This is life. Life is filled with chaos, and this practice is learning to get quiet and still within all of the chaos. Posture, you just want to be comfortable. If you're on a cushion, often helps sliding to the front third, pushing the stomach forward. If you're on a bench or chair, however you're seated, just trying to sit up straight. If you have a posture that you're normally stuck in all day long, I suggest changing that posture and bringing yourself upright. The way we physically sit has a really more impact and effect on our mind than we probably recognize. We get stuck in physical patterns that just trigger mental and emotional patterns. So just trying to sit up straight, relaxing the shoulders, hands are on the knees or lap. Most important, especially if you're new, don't expect anything. You're not trying to empty your mind. You're not trying to go blank, and you will not think nothing. We're just going to sit and breathe. I'll guide us as we begin. And we'll settle into a little bit of silence. And starting with your eyes closed if comfortable, or slightly open. Mouth is open or closed. Start with taking 3 deep breaths, slowly. And eventually, settle into a natural rhythm of the breath. Noticing the mind as it wanders, jumping from thought to thought. Start with gently guiding the attention, focus, to the stomach or chest. Breathing in Feel them rise. Breathing out, they fall. Simply continue this practice, observing sensation of breath. As the mind wanders, lost in thought, recognize it, release that thought, return attention, focus to the breath. letting go of expectations, letting go of judgments from the practice, just sitting, breathing. Learning to be comfortable in stillness, in quiet, wanting nothing but to sit and breathe. And with the body still, rested, and the speech quiet, aware of all sounds, and the mind learning to settle. Know what it's like to just sit and breathe. Knowing with each breath, there's nothing else to do, nowhere else to go, and no one else to be. Everything beautiful, exactly as it is. Sitting, breathing. And once again, taking 3 deep breaths, slowly. And when ready, slowly opening the eyes, slowly beginning to move. And most important, with the practice of meditation, is to recognize how you feel now, immediately after. Compare this to how you typically feel throughout the day. Recognize the difference, if there is one. Ask yourselves how you prefer to feel every day for the rest of your life. And realize however you feel now, if it's quiet, calm, and still, or a busy mind, racing mind, whatever you're sitting with at this moment, has nothing to do with anything I said. It's nothing to do with how we sit, with the hands across the legs. It's nothing to do with the sounds around us or anything else for that matter. It's everything to do with your own mind and your own mind's reaction to an external condition. This is what the Buddha called pratitya samuppada, means dependent origination. This is the basis of the Buddha's awakening. The word Buddha simply means awakened. He's a human being, no different than any one of us, who began to understand why he suffered, why he got angry, sad, depressed, stressed, anxious. He began to understand the causal relationship of all phenomena. And what that means very simply for all of us, regardless of where you come from or what you believe in or where you think you're going, your whole life is filled with things that happen. You react. More stuff happens. more reactions. That's it. That's what we get. This practice is simply learning what it's like to respond to something quietly, peacefully, still. Because for most of us, the way you responded to the last 20 minutes is quite different from how you respond to everything else that's happening throughout your day. So all we're working on is closing the gap to where the way you feel now is closer to how you feel always. Just as driven, motivated, productive, successful, whatever that means to you in your respective lives. But with a mind that's steady, clear, focused, distracted by nothing, disturbed by no one. It's not an easy practice. It's not necessarily fun. It's not an escape, as often people think it is. Your life is a crazy, hectic, stressed out mess. Meditation won't fix it. It helps you become aware of it, so you can then actually make changes in your life. Meditation is free. Buddhist practice is free. It's simply sitting, breathing, becoming aware of everything you think, everything you say, and everything you do. That's it. That's why we call it a practice. It's not a quick fix. It's not a 6-week course. It's just each moment becoming aware of your thoughts and words and actions. And taking time each day to just slow down, to just stop, to set everything down, sit and breathe. And get to know the one thing that causes all the misery in your life. And that's your own thoughts. And that's it. It's super easy to blame everybody else for all of our misery. And it doesn't mean that what other people are doing or what's going on around us is healthy or good. But they're not the cause of our misery. Our mind's reaction to what's going on is the cause of our misery. So this practice is learning to gain control of our reaction to all of these triggers that constantly occur, because they're not going away anytime soon. So with that, I'll pause. For me, I really always just prefer to respond to questions around meditation, Buddhist practice, anything that you're sitting with. And we'll use the rest of our brief time this evening for thoughts or questions. And for those, again, joining virtually, welcome. Glad you're here. There's a chat box on your screen, as most of you know. Feel free to, if you have any questions or anything, to put them there, and I'll do my best to respond as well. So we'll open up to questions.
How does Buddhism look at or deal with mass suffering?
Is that it? Short question. I didn't know if there was more to that or if you were done.
No.
Yeah. So the question was, to repeat to those who didn't hear it, how does Buddhism deal with mass suffering? So the very first thing the Buddha said is life is filled with suffering. Mass suffering is a lot of individual people suffering. And when I say that that's all it is, I'm not minimizing it, but that's the reality of it, right? So the first thing to understand is that we're all suffering. We cannot escape it. As the Buddha taught very clearly, there is birth, there is aging, there is sickness, and there is death. That's what we get. That's what we signed up for. Now, in the middle of all of that, there's also beauty and joy and happiness and good times as well. Now, this idea of mass suffering, it becomes incredibly painful because when we as individuals observe mass suffering going on, and everybody's locked in on the same view of something. By view, I don't mean perception. I mean, we're all watching massive suffering going on. And then you have a ton of different perceptions and views and sides and all that within that. But the world is watching massive suffering occur. Right? Now, 3 weeks ago, there was also mass suffering going on. 3 years ago, 30 years ago, 100 years from now. It's not going to change anytime soon. It has always been there. It will always be there. So for me, the question, as my master always said, is, instead of looking for answers, alter the way we ask questions. It's not about how we view mass suffering. It exists. And it sucks. And it's not easy. And it's painful. But there is one thing and one thing only that you can control. And that is what? Your own suffering. Now, if we view what you're referring to as mass suffering, and we allow that to destroy us, now we're roaming around with a pretty darn good life. And now we're miserable and pissed off and angry. And then other people roaming around with a pretty good life have to deal with us being miserable and pissed off and angry. And I'm not suggesting that people won't have emotions of anger, frustration, and the sadness of what's going on in the world right now. But Buddhist teachings are not about mass anything. It's about each individual's response and reaction and interaction to a situation. And I think also understanding with this teaching what we have the ability to control or not control. Half the time we can't even control what we say, yet we roam around thinking that we have some control to drastically change the world. The Buddha taught that there are healthy cravings and there are healthy desires. Often in Buddhism it gets, talked about, well, don't crave anything, don't desire anything. Well, as I say all the time, as the Buddha taught, without this desire and craving to suffer less, none of us would find the spiritual journey at all. So to have a craving and desire to see less suffering in this world is a beautiful craving and desire. But if you're trying to create less suffering in the world with hatred and anger and rage, you're probably not decreasing the suffering in the world. You're probably just throwing more hatred and anger and rage onto situations that already have enough anger and hatred and rage. So, control what we can. But sadly, there is and always will be suffering. Because of greed, anger, and ignorance. The root cause of suffering, the three poisons, the second noble truth. When we are greedy, when we are angry, and when we are ignorant, we create suffering. It's that simple. And so the practice is to overcome greed with generosity, overcome anger with compassion, and overcome ignorance with wisdom. And if we can bring this into our worlds, we'll suffer less. What else? There was a hand somewhere here. Other questions?
I think so much suffering comes with anticipation of what will, you get the word your brother's had a horrible accident or your daughter's suffering through a relationship. Or there's so much anticipation. And that I think we suffer, and even post events, we find it hard, I think, or at least I do, sometimes. Not to suffer, not to worry, right? And
Yeah. Are you ever afraid of this terrible anticipation that something good might actually happen to you?
I am so optimistic, honestly.
Well, it sure didn't sound like it from the first part of what you said.
I am, really. And
I'm not doubting you, I'm just saying.
I do suffer from disappointment, I guess, from like another's unhappiness and fight, and just like, oh, can't we just be happy? And so many others are not.
Yeah,
Like,
well,
I could live all day long in joy, but I find I empathize, or I'm trying to relate, and
but then you're not in joy. So what you're saying is not really true.
it's
What
just
you're
a
saying is-
cycle system.
Hang on. You brought it up, so let's go into it, right? What you're saying is that, I could live in so much joy if other people were just joyful.
Yeah.
Now we all know that your misery is our fault. Well,
I wish I could live.
No. See, you're spinning shit.
Yeah.
What I'm asking you to do is actually be, hang on. No, I'm not, no. What I'm first asking you to do is be honest with what you're actually saying. What you're saying is you could be happy if everybody else was happy. That's what I'm hearing. You could be joyful.
Well, not happy, but not suffering. Like, so my husband.
Oh, here we go.
I just, and oftentimes, unfortunately, those who are suffering put themselves there.
Hang on, no, stop. You're making this way too easy for me. All you're sitting, I know you're not seeing this. Now you're wishing you hadn't said anything. Hey, no, hang on. This is about you. But you're, without even seeing it, but I got about 50 people in the room that are all seeing and hearing what I'm hearing. You're making this about everybody else. And what I'm saying is, it's not about everybody else. It's not about your husband. You are having difficulty finding joy. Period. End of story. What I'm suggesting is you don't respond to that. What I'm suggesting is you spend the next week every single day recognizing that you are having difficulty finding joy, and not make it about other people's joy or sorrow. And I'm speaking and looking to you, but this is for everybody in this room, because we are all guilty of this at times in our lives. And no, I don't want you to respond. I want you to just sit with what I'm saying. And no, you hear me, but what I want is for you to understand that your happiness comes from you and you only, and your misery comes from you and you only. Everybody else, everything else, every other experience is simply a trigger to us. And we can get really confused and become very, we're very good at convincing ourselves that we know what we're doing. And we're very good at convincing ourselves that if everybody else would just be a certain way, I'd be fine. Well, here's the thing. Everybody else is never going to be that way, which means we are not okay. And what this has to do with is our effort to try to do what to everybody else? Control them. Again, I'm sure nobody in this room ever tries to control people. But if everybody would just do what we want them to do, we'll be good. And I appreciate you saying what everybody else is probably sitting with, right? You just happen to open your mouth in the front row. I don't even want you to respond. I'm not trying to sound like the asshole guy shutting up a woman. I'm trying to sound like the dude who's, I love you too, who really wants you to just sit with the fact that we are putting a lot of emphasis on other people with everything we do all day long. And that's not what this practice is about. This practice is looking at yourself honestly and seeing the reflection of other people's actions in what it does to us, because it will destroy you. Or it can raise you up and make you feel like the greatest person in the world. And this practice is cutting through all of that. It's not about other people making us feel happy or other people making us feel miserable. Because then what we're going to do is we're going to run around all day long anticipating and hoping and wanting other people to be certain ways. And then our entire focus is just trying to manipulate other people to be a certain way so we're okay. Other people can and will always treat you like crap. And other people can and will always treat you like a beautiful human being. And your entire life is going to be those experiences. How you respond to them is what matters. Other questions? Yeah.
This is more from your personal experience, what you say, like triggers it. It makes me think that in the layperson's world, we have opportunities, which triggers I call opportunities. So when you go to the monastery to do your practicing and studying, how does that relate to being in the lay world?
Yeah.
To deal with having opportunities to do your learning
Sure.
versus being here. It seems like the real work really gets.
Yeah, so the question for those who didn't hear it in essence is, how do we, when you look at like monastery life and you're in the monastery and you're living that life, your question, and then I'll kind of break it down in a minute, is asking, how does like that experience compare to maybe triggers in the layperson's life, right? They're no different. Your perception is that, oh, if you're in a monastery and you're in a robe and you don't have a bunch of stuff, that triggers aren't there. Absolute wrong perception. Somebody asked, when I was there, there was a younger person who asked one of the nuns, completely differently, but in the same way. She said, she started her question with, you don't know what it's like because you're a nun. She said, I have two sisters. And the nun let her continue her story, right? Her question, whatever. And then responded with, I live with 100 sisters. And we share 3 toilets. And the same amount of water to wash our clothes, and the food to eat and cook and prepare, and who gets to sit where. So there's many levels to this, but I just want to touch on this first because it's a very common misconception that comes up a lot, is for everybody here to really understand that monks and nuns are just human. They live no different than we do. Many of them have brothers and sisters, and obviously mothers and fathers, and some of them sons and daughters. And they have challenges and difficulties, and they have egos and personalities, and they have cravings, and they have desires, and they have arguments, and no different than we do. So I encourage all of you as you begin to, or continue on wherever you're at with your journey, to learn about Buddhism, and you go to places like Meadow Forest and Deer Park Monastery, and you see like monks and nuns, the brothers and sisters living there. They're faced with the same challenges you are. They just look a little bit, the challenges look a little bit differently. But you don't think a monk who's like 5 years into, or a nun 5 years into practice isn't sitting there really hoping the food that they like gets put in front of them? You think, my master used to say you could shave your head and put on a robe, that doesn't make you a monk. You're sitting there hoping for the food you like, just like the non-monks or nuns. So that's the first part of your question, right? Which I think is really important to understand. And then from there, ultimately, it doesn't matter what monks and nuns' lives are like, because that's not your life. Right? You have loved ones 2 rows behind you, and you have little loved ones at home messing up your house right now. And they're not going away, thankfully, anytime soon. Right? So you could fantasize and dream about the simple life in a monastery, but it's not happening. But what I want you to realize is that even if it did happen, the challenges and triggers that you have now will still exist there. They'll just be different. Instead of a friend or a family member that annoys you, there'll be a different nun that's your sister that annoys you. I'm very serious. You know? So, as a reminder for everybody, please drop. It's actually, and I know this isn't the nature of the question, I'm just rambling right now, but it's actually really, I don't want to say, the words that come into my head, harmful, dangerous, disrespectful, and again, this is not about your question at all, but please don't think that monks and nuns, do not put them on pedestals. This is one of the most important things that I really want people to understand in this culture as you learn about Buddhism. Do not praise them as if they are these all-enlightened beings. They chose and are on that path because they wanted to find peace and happiness from the deep, deep suffering that exists, which means they have deep, deep suffering that exists. The one thing for me that I always respect more than anything is that the people that choose that path, I mean, there's a depth and a dedication and a commitment to a spiritual journey that I admire, that most lay people just, you know, we don't have the conditions for it, or we don't want to make it, that kind of dedication to it. But you don't have to be a monk or nun to dedicate your life to a layperson's renunciate life. But yeah, don't put the monks and nuns on pedestals. They're struggling just like you are. It's just different. So, yeah. Other questions? Yeah.
To go back to this, and in not letting, owning your own stuff, not letting others affect your happiness, or you being control your happiness, not control others. Where within Buddhism, boundary setting, and you're like, where
Yeah.
and Buddha, like that's a popular thing, like set boundaries with people so that you protect yourself. I know you talked about like being in harm's way. There are those good boundaries, like get the hell out if you're in harm's way. But I'm not talking about that severe, like just in day-to-day life when you have your triggers and not trying to control others, but setting it go ahead.
Yeah, definitely. No, the question around boundaries, and it comes up a lot, and no matter how many times I say it, it's something that's really difficult to practice. Now, just to put it into context initially, your question of, where does Buddhism talk about, or the idea of boundaries in Buddhism, I first want to start with the fact that when the Buddha was alive and he had the Sangha, the monks and nuns, the disciples, and they were, they renounced worldly possessions and their lay lives, and they shaved their heads and put on robes and had 7 or 8 possessions, and that was it. They also had anywhere from 227 to 311 precepts that they had to follow, or they would be kicked out of the order. You know what I look at those precepts as? Boundaries. But at that point in time, the precepts were set up for a couple reasons. Primarily to keep the Sangha and the community safe, right? From harming themselves or harming others, but also to keep their minds and bodies safe. So boundaries have always been a part, what we call boundaries today, have always been a part of Buddhist teachings, at least in my perception of Buddhist teachings. Now, bring that into our kind of today's lay lives, and again, just to touch on it, even though you commented on it, for those who never heard me talk about this, very often people may think that Buddhism is like, oh, nothing matters, I'm just going to let people abuse me, but I'm Buddhist, so it's okay. No. It's not okay. Understand that if you are in unhealthy, toxic, physical, mental, emotional, abusive, domestic violence situations, Buddhism does not say that's okay and that you should just be there and embrace the abuser. No, get out. That is the wisest, safest, most compassionate thing you can do for yourself and the other. Because if someone is abusing you and you remove yourself, I know this isn't the nature of the question, but I have to touch on this first for everybody. If someone is abusing you and you remove yourself from that situation, it protects you, and what does it also stop the person from doing? Abusing you. Now, it doesn't mean they're not going to go abuse others, but you can't necessarily control that at that moment, right? So always protect yourself first. And again, to your question, you very specifically said you're not asking about that. You're talking about more just kind of everyday, well, that's everyday stuff too, but things that are not maybe so heavily abusive. I think in setting up, as you say, boundaries for yourself, it's important to understand, again, as you said, using your words, what are the triggers? Do you know them? And if you know them, and you almost are like anticipating them, right? I remember years ago I was walking with a good friend, and I grew up always a kid that, like, if there was trouble, man, if I hadn't started it, I was running towards it. And so we were walking it's like 15 years ago, we were walking one night, and all of a sudden there were like all these sirens, and it was loud, and you could just tell something was going on. We're walking side by side. I sped up, like walking faster to see what was going on, and about, I don't know, 5 seconds later, I turned and looked. He had gone the other way, right? Some of us run straight into conflict and trouble. And some of us recognize it well before it even occurs, and to remove ourselves from it, right? So begin to recognize, what are your triggers? What are the things that are potentially going to, really impact your mental, emotional state? And stay away from them if at all possible. It's not always possible, right? Loved ones, family, friends, things like that. It's not always possible to remove our colleagues, right? I mean, ultimately, it is always possible. You can't always just remove yourself from a situation. You don't have to stay there, but recognize them, I think, is really important, and try to create a life where less of those occur. And that's really what it's about, is can we build a safe, healthy life where we're not constantly surrounded by nonsense? Some of us just throw ourselves in the middle of nonsense. And some of us, we try not to, and it finds us. So I get that part too. But some of us are like, yeah, there's trouble. I'm just going to keep, If we think often longer before we speak and do certain things, we can often avoid a lot of the chaos that arises in our lives. So keep boundaries, find them that work for you, and try to recognize them early on. Yeah. Yep.
Okay. When you spoke about triggers, it interested me. But shouldn't we be trying to get rid of the trigger rather than avoid the trigger?
100%.
Okay.
We should be trying to get rid of it.
And in Buddhism, they say, how would you do that?
Just absolutely master the mind to stay in the present moment, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You asked the question, right? So your question was, for those who didn't hear it, repeat for those virtually. The question was, and it's a beautiful beginner's mind, perfect. I mean, you're brand new to this, right? Like day one. And that's why this question is so perfect, because it's actually addressing the obvious that people who were like 10 years into Buddhism would never think about it that way, because they've been too warped by Buddhist teachings. I mean that very seriously, right? Your question was, wait, shouldn't we be trying to not have the trigger as opposed to avoiding it? That's what you're asking. Yes, we should not have the trigger. And then your question was, okay, well then how do we do that, right? What most people are trying to do is manage and monitor the triggers in our lives, because we haven't actually realized they don't have to be there. Or even if we've realized it, we're not actually willing to do the work that's required for the triggers to simply not exist. And when I say we're not willing to do the work, I'm not saying that to offend anyone. When I say do the work, as I was talking about, therapy is important, but Buddhist practice is not therapy. They play hand in hand. If you're in therapy, stay in therapy, but understand that we can process things our entire life. And we could die still processing things. Learning to understand that 100% the trigger does not have to be there is the path to end suffering. It's only what people have been trying to do for 2,500 years. So it's not easy. But when I said that kind of jokingly and seriously about training the mind, that's what the meditation practice is for. It is to learn to abide body, speech, and mind in the present moment. You know what is not in each present moment? Fear, anxiety, worry, stress, anger, sadness, depression. And one could say, well, I'm angry in this present moment. Yes, you're angry in the present moment at what is no longer happening. It might have been happening 3 seconds ago, and now it's happening again in your mind because you're still focused on it. What we focus on triggers us. So the training of the mind, breath in, that's the Buddhist teachings on meditation. If you're breathing in, taking a short breath, and know you're breathing in, taking a short breath. If you're breathing out, taking a long breath, know you're breathing out, taking a long breath. He didn't say breathe in and solve the world's problems. He didn't say breathe out and, whatever. I don't have a good example. It was just an awareness of present moment. And if we can be aware of the present moment, then we're not living where all the triggers are. So yeah, in Buddhism we call that beginner's mind. That beginner's mind, right? Anything is possible. So, anything else? We'll do one more question. Yeah.
So I think I'm gonna stumble over my words here. What you two kind of started off with, I mean, I think about that often, and I struggle with, like, I feel somewhat the need to stay informed on current events. However, that's not healthy for me, and I know I can't do anything about it. However, it feels, I don't know, irresponsible in some kind of way to, like, feel like I'm burying ahead.
Yeah.
As I'm sitting here thinking through that, it's almost like this causes me pain to look at. I also recognize there is almost literally nothing I can do about it unless it's election season and I vote for somebody who I think will do something about it, but that's a different thing. Therefore, unless there is something I can do to remove another person's suffering in the moment, then it's just, this is not good for me, therefore, move on. Or
Well, it's interesting, you said that last part, unless, as if that wasn't important.
Yeah.
Unless I can help someone remove their suffering. You said that as if that was like an afterthought that wasn't important. And maybe, in fact, that's what you can and should be doing.
Right. Didn't mean for that to be the last thing.
I know you didn't mean for it, but it was.
Sure.
Right? So here's I 100% understand that, I shouldn't say that, but I understand where you're coming from.
Yeah.
Good news is, Dharma Bum Temple, we don't talk about religion or politics because those are the two things that divide people.
Sure.
So we can talk about this without talking about it.
Yeah.
And it's the nature of what's on everybody's minds these days, and it's heavy, and it's painful, and it's heartbreaking, and nobody knows what to do, and often people feel like they just can't do anything. And the first thing I want to say, which you kind of addressed, same thing, is yes, the practice, for me, what I learned from Buddhist teachings is you don't, as you said, I'm just repeating what you said, we don't ignore things, but we also maybe don't need to consume. Actually, Brother Michael, who was a monk at Deer Park for like 15 years, was here last night. He talked about this, that what we actually consume, media-wise, social media, things like that, really can ruin us. So we don't need to ignore it, but maybe we don't need to look at Instagram stories for 12 hours a day. So find a balance there that is healthy for you. Some people, those who have no triggers, could watch it all day long and not be triggered by it and see that their perception of what's going on, right? Now, what I was going to say, which is why I kind of picked on the last thing you said, is that when we often find in situations like this, and we feel like there's nothing we can do, there's always something we can do. And what that thing is might not seem like it's going to solve all the problems in the world. But what that thing is actually doing, that one thing, is potentially changing and saving somebody's life that's right next to you right now, that's being shattered and broken and destroyed. And maybe what they actually need is for you to just listen to them and hear them or hug them or whatever it might be, because they are so destroyed by what's happening. So I think in those moments where we feel so helpless, someone asked the same line of questioning, and they took it from a place of privilege. They felt, their privilege in not having to deal with all of these things. And I talk about my privilege all the time, and just, never had to walk down the street and be afraid of anything. Like ever. So to recognize our privilege, to recognize the fact that there's probably not a bomb, and I mean this very seriously, that's going to drop on us right now. But there are people in this room that are living with that fear on some level. And if we can be there for them, that's what we can do. At the very least. So, again, I think this practice, to wrap up, is understanding the nature of our suffering and understanding that every person around us is also suffering. And if we get quiet and we listen to ourselves and we listen to others, we begin to understand how our thoughts, our words, and our actions really do change the world, because they change the world for somebody. Y'all know the starfish story? I'll close with this story. A lot of religions use it, I'm told, but so there's a person walking on the beach, and all these starfish had washed up on the shore. And the person starts picking up the starfish and throwing them back in the water. And there's hundreds or thousands of starfish, right? And somebody else comes up to the person and says, what are you doing? And they said, well, there's all these starfish up here, and they're dying because they're out of the water. And I'm putting them back in the water. And the other person says, well, there's hundreds of them here. You can't possibly save them all. Why does it matter? And the person holding the starfish says, it matters to this one. So often this idea of we have to save the world starts with just saving the person that you're in traffic with, by not cutting them off and flipping them off and yelling F you. It is these large events that trigger these heavy, heavy emotions. But 90% of the things, and I'm just making up that number, that we do that piss people off all day long have nothing to do with these huge things that are going on. It just has to do with our inability to recognize we're just treating people like crap, and we should stop. So I'm going to close on that, including ourselves. Start there. Be kind to yourself. And we'll join palms as we do a transfer of merit. Many merit gained from this practice be transferred to all beings in all directions. May all beings be at peace. May all be free from suffering. May any merit gained be transferred to Jackie Hyder during her time of rebirth, and to her friends and family who suffer at this time. All right, so just a few quick announcements before y'all head out. I'm our Dharma Bum host, Eddie, and we are still looking for additional hosts for Tuesday nights. So if anybody's interested, please let me know. We could really use the help.
Hello, everyone. I'm tonight's host, Eddie. We opened the Dharma Bum Temple 17 years ago to introduce Buddhist practice to those who show up. Those who lead are not nuns, monks, gurus, masters, or teachers, and are not looking for students. They are simply practitioners sharing their interpretation of the practice. Every night we have different classes led by different people from various Buddhist traditions. We have a recovery sangha that meets several times a week for anyone with addiction, and our food redistribution program is every Thursday at 5 p.m. We have classes and programs every day, and everything we offer here is always free. The full schedule is on our website and also posted in the entryway above the shoe rack. We have a lending library. If you see a book you like, feel free to borrow it and then bring it back whenever you're done. Please straighten your seat or cushion before you head out. If a few people could stay to close and latch the windows, that would be helpful. Thank you for being here. We wish you well and hope to see you all again.
Thanks, Ed.